Welcome back, everybody, to a new edition of the Weekly Yard, bringing you the rundown on this week's fantasy matchup. Weren't expecting this, were you? We're trying something a little new. We're doing something Sports Center style. Instead of a newsletter, we're going to give it to you live, pre-recorded, and have just a conversational talk about what happened in the past week's fantasy matchup. Actually, it's been 2 weeks. I missed a couple weeks, I understand this. So we're going to combine both weeks, but we're going to try to keep it concise so you'll actually watch, because I know a lot of you weren't reading, and I know who you are. I'm here with my big brother, Robert Thurman. He's joined us in this talk. Robert, introduce yourself to the crowd.
Well, most of you know me. I'm his older brother, and as you may not be aware, I am guilty as charged. I am one of the folks that probably don't read the newsletter every single week. Definitely when I win. Probably not the only person out there who does that. I want to send some quick shout outs. Mitch, what's up? Tara, love you. Shay, the original commish. I see you out there. Nicole, didn't forget about you. And of course, my lovely wife. I know plenty of you by name, but not by face. But hopefully, if you drop enough comments, beat it up. Also provide some constructive criticism so we can continue to make this better week after week after week. But you know what? Let's go ahead and continue.
Yep, we're going to try to keep this concise, like I said. Week 9 and week 10, mostly focused on week 10. So let's go ahead and dig into it. First, we're going to start with the champ, Marco Dolgetta, New York. We know nothing. Unfortunately, he's dropped 2 straight. It's pushed him back to the second place in the Central Division, 4th place overall, behind King Barbecue, myself, the Chicago Bootleggers, and Ben Incognito Ben. In week 9, he took an L versus King Barbecue, 138.81 to 112.81. And in week 10, he took another L versus my brother here, the Salty Sacks, 155.89 to 142.05. So let's talk about what went on in New York We Know Nothing's camp. First, we're going to start with the good. Quarterback Drake May lit it up as he has been known to do. He had 22.1 points, 281 passing yards, 73.5% completion rating, and 1 touchdown. Talking about Drake May, he's coming out of week 10 as the favorite for MVP. Through 10 games, he had over 200 passing yards in every game and had thrown at least 2 touchdowns across the previous 8 games. May has completed 4 passes for 167 yards and a touchdown while under pressure, and thrown for 100 plus yards in every single game this season. Robert, tell me what you think about Drake May coming into this week.
Drake May, I think that he's probably going to go down as one of Marco's, if not the best, one of the best draft decisions that he made. I believe that he picked him up 121st overall, ended up dropping him for what reason I'm not sure of, but he picked him up again, which is all that's really important in this league and in fantasy football.
Astute move from the champ. That's now, champion moves.
You're absolutely right about that. Now, Drake hasn't been putting up top tier numbers as it pertains to passing. He's been around that 200-yard range, but his efficiency is what's really kept him right there in the conversation. And the rest of their schedule seems to be very favorable, so I don't see him coming out of Marco's lineup in the foreseeable future. What do you think, Dave?
Well, tell me what you think about what Drake May and Mike Vrabel have done to turn this Patriots team around. Because this is the first year with Mike Vrabel, right? And Drake May had a so-so season last year under the previous coach, Jared Mayo. What has Mike Vrabel instituted that has caused Drake May to perform so well?
Vrabel has brought in a level of consistency. If you watch the Patriots when he was a player, of course he was a defensive guy, and he's brought that to the table. But outside of that, he understands structure because he was the head coach of the Titans prior to getting this gig. And you can really see the difference. It's night and day between what we saw with Mayo last year and what we're seeing with Vrabel this year. Now, I don't want to hold that against Mayo because he was a first-time head coach, and the cupboard was completely bare, and he had a first-year quarterback.
Wasn't he an assistant the year before?
Yes, but being an assistant coach and taking on the responsibility of a head coach are completely different things. I don't think that you can really judge a head coach until you give him at least 3 years in the system. And obviously he wasn't afforded that opportunity. But we've seen this happen in the NFL before. When the cupboard is completely bare, you bring in a coach, and then when you get the quarterback situation solidified, then you bring in another coach. And I think that Mayo fell victim to that. However, he did get that experience underneath his belt. But let's transition back to Vrabel and what they're doing this year. He's done an outstanding job. And he's in a division that is relatively weak this year, and he's taken advantage of that.
All right. Let's take a look at some highlights from Drake May's performance in Week 10.
This is a great read from a young quarterback. He has 9 defenders bunched into the box, and he throws it right over the top of their head. That's what happens when you play the blitz, but you don't back up the DBs far enough. 6.
Now that you've seen what Drake May accomplished in Week 10, we're going to move on to another standout on New York We Know Nothing's roster. That would be the running back, RB1, Josh Jacobs. Jacobs scored 25.7 points this week for Marco Dojeda. That's off of 21 carries, 74 scrimmage yards, and 1 touchdown. And I may say that Jacobs is really lighting it up this year on Green Bay. How would you compare Jacobs' performance this year on Green Bay to last year on the Raiders?
Well, he's obviously on a better team.
That's true.
We thought that the Raiders were going to be a little bit better this year, just based on the late season performance. Let's just kind of look at that second half. And of course, they had Bowers.
Sure.
And he was an absolute beast.
And he's out in Week 10, much to my chagrin. I have him after a beast Week 9 performance, but that's neither here nor there. Please continue.
Yes. Now, if you look at Jacobs' performance on paper, in real life football, he hasn't reached the 100-yard mark yet. However, that doesn't necessarily always translate to fantasy football. From where he was picked, which I believe was 24th overall, he's been absolutely outstanding. He's a stalwart, he's a stone in Marco's offense, and he can be considered a number 1 sit it and forget it. And fortunately, he's been healthy for the most part this season. So I don't necessarily have any negative issues or concerns about Jacobs' performance this season. And I look forward to great things going forward.
He's an asset to Marco Dojeda for sure, and he's definitely stepped it up over last year. But someone that actually performed the best for Marco in Week 10 was the Chargers defense and special teams, believe it or not. The Chargers DST actually scored 33.75 points for Marco in Week 10. They pulled down 2 interceptions, 3 sacks, and they had 1 safety. Robert, can you talk to me a little bit about how the Chargers defense is better this year under Harbaugh?
Well, Harbaugh holds a special place in my heart. Because yes, as you're aware, he's the next Bears quarterback.
Yes, that's right.
And we were kind of, as fans, pulling for him to be the next Bears head coach.
I wanted them to pick him up over renewing Matt Eberflus' contract, and I was right in hindsight. But I'm happy things shook out the way they did because we got Ben Johnson and we're doing great. But please carry on.
Yes, but as we've watched the season progress, we can see just the difference in the sentiment of the players and the energy that he brings to any team that he's been involved with. Prior to being with the Chargers, we saw what he did with Michigan, asterisks. And then we saw what he did with the, yes, I am going to put that out there because
there's a little bit of
that's a side conversation. That's a side
gamesmanship involved. A little bit of gamesmanship.
Yes,
Go ahead.
but we also know what he did with the 49ers.
All right.
He's been a winner and a winner and a winner.
That's right.
And we can see how that's translated to the Chargers because the Chargers have always, well, not always, but for the most part, recently had talent. They had talent last year, but they just failed to have that leader that could put everything together. And now they do. And that defense has always had names. They had names, but they didn't have production. And this year, they've been able to put it all together. Outside of that, the offense is more balanced. which allows them to continue to move the change, which takes a little bit of pressure off of that defense. And I think the proof is in the pudding.
We can take a step back. Let's talk about the areas where Marco wasn't so strong in Week 10. Running back Devin Singletary is one of the low points of Week 10 for Marco. He only scored 11.3 points off of 20 rushing yards, 53 passing yards, or receiving yards, excuse me, and he averaged just 2.5 yards per carries with 0 touchdown. What do you think about Devin Singletary as a whole this season?
Well, he was basically non-existent up until last week. We're all aware that Scatterboot got hurt.
That's right.
Devastating injury from a young man
Sorry,
who
Ben.
had so much promise.
That's right.
And we all saw Singletary sitting out there on the waiver wire, and some of us, depending on your RB depth, were contemplating whether or not we wanted to make a play for him. Well, Marco did. And the issue going forward is going to be his split, because it's not going to necessarily be his backfield for the foreseeable future. So, is he an RB1? No. An RB2? Possibly. But more than likely, he's going to be a flex going forward, unless there's an injury.
All in all, it led to a week that wasn't great for Marco. The lows outweighed the highs, but let's talk about the winner of Week 10. Let's talk about you a little bit. The Salty Sacks came ahead this week. They bested the champion, and the leaders on the team were, one, Josh Allen.
Yes.
To start, he scored 22.34 points, 70% completion rating, 306 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and 1 fumble. So moving into Josh Allen a little bit, his passer rating for the game was 98.5. He threw 1 interception and lost 1 fumble in the game, contributing to multiple turnovers, actually. So it was kind of a down game for him, believe it or not, even though he scored 20-plus points for you. The interception was by Miami quarterback Ifeanyi Melifonwu, and according to Deeper Metrics, his completion percentage over expected was a negative 1.8%, believe it or not, which is one of his worst marks versus Miami. Data from AWS Next Gen Stats has Allen at averaging 3.53 seconds to throw, which is his longest of his career in many years, right? And his offensive line protection was poor. He faced a high rate of pressures and sacks, which actually hampered his performance. So even though he surpassed 20 points this week for you, on the field, he didn't live up to his own expectations. Can you talk to me about how Josh Allen performed this week versus how he normally performs for you?
Well, he didn't live up to my expectations either. And I can't say that he's lived up to my expectations for being my second overall pick. Now, we also have to understand that I was picking 11th overall, and I decided to take a quarterback at that point because by the time it snaked back, the top 3 were gone, and I made the decision that I wanted one of them. So, you know what? You have to live with your decisions. What I couldn't factor in is his receiving core's lack of ability to create separation on a consistent basis. And I think that that's really been his Achilles heel, because the running game has been going well. King Barbecue knows that with Cook. But on the other end, as far as it comes to progressing the ball down the field via passing, they've been troubled. Now, we knew going into this season that they were going to spread the ball around, which has been a great thing for their offense since Stephon Diggs departed. However, you have to give him just a little bit of wiggle room to throw you the ball so he's not putting it into the jungle, so to speak, into danger. And we saw him periodically throughout the season try to put the cape on and become Josh Allen, the MVP.
That's right.
And whenever that happens, you know what? Every once in a while, you'll make the ESPN highlight reel for the right reasons, and every once in a while, you'll make it for the wrong. And we saw a few of those this last week.
That's right. Actually, we're going to check out one of them now. Let's take a look at Josh Allen's interception in the end zone.
This is what happens when Josh Allen decides that he has to be Superman. He's down 0-16. He goes through his progressions and nobody's open. And he decides that he has to throw the ball anyway. The result? Interception.
Next, we're going to talk about the best performer on your team, which is actually the Broncos' defensive and special teams unit. It actually scored 33.25 points for you. They amassed that through 1 interception, 6 sacks, 1 block, and held their opponents only 7 points. Tell me what you think about your Broncos DST now under Sean Payton. I know you love Sean Payton so much.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, one of my favorite head coaches of all time. But outside of that defense, as a matter of fact, I reached up a little bit because, typically you take your defense in the last round or the round prior to that. But I had scoped them out just because I saw the schedule and I recognized the potential of that defense. And they have definitely held their value.
Well, 1 second, Robert. Sean Payton's an offensive coach. So was your evaluation of their defense because of Sean Payton or because of what they were coming into the season as individual players?
It was the personnel.
Okay.
I think that coming into the season, they had an excellent front seven, but even more so than that, it was the secondary, highlighted by Patrick Surtain Jr., PS2, who's hurt right now, but at the same time, the defense has kind of coalesced. They've melded, and they've become a team unto themselves. And you can see that. The proof is in the pudding. Because the offense, at times, if you're watching on Sundays, sputters. But the defense never wavers. And I've definitely seen the proof in the pudding when the dust settles at the end of the week. And as you stated, they scored over 30 points. And to have a defense that sit it and forget it is just one less headache that you have to worry about throughout the season.
And I mean, this may not be a popular opinion, but I actually reach for defenses. I'll take a defense in the 6th, 7th round, and I'll tell you why. In our league, defenses, if you get like a top 5, top 7 defense, they can easily score 20, 25 points for your week. I mean, that's quarterback, wide receiver 1 territory, right?
Absolutely.
So when everyone else is going for their 3rd wide receiver, they're just leaving the defenses wide open.
Yes.
And I think the results have spoken for themselves. I mean, last year I was in the Super Bowl. Year before that, I took a step back, but I believe over the last 6 or 7 years, I've made either the Super Bowl or won the Super Bowl 3 or 4 times. So I think that's a strategy that we should all employ because it's just a high-scoring group, right?
I mean, a good defense can take you far, and I'd rather have a 20-plus point scoring defense than be working on my 3rd running back, who's going to give you what, 9, 10 points a game?
Right.
I think it means something. But that's just my strategy. Do what you want. In fact, don't do what I do because I don't want you to win. Getting back to the game, let's talk about the narrative overall of New York We Know Nothing versus the Salty Sacks. After the losing streak, Salty Sacks made a big statement against the champs, knocking them back to 2nd in the Central Division behind moi. Both quarterbacks played well, but the Sacks receivers were the difference makers, as we discussed. Marco could not have won this game, that's week 10 by the way, with any combination of his roster. Jamar Chase being on bye in week 10 was a huge blow for Marco when he actually would have won the matchup had Chase.
All right, well, I have to push back a little bit against your early defense strategy. Now, when I say early defense strategy, before the 10th round. Why, you may ask? The reason being is that we all have to hedge our bet against injury. Now, if you're fortunate and you have not experienced any catastrophic injury this season, then lucky you. But for the most part, every single week, somebody is looking for someone on the waiver wire to replace someone who is either doubtful or questionable or worst case scenario on the IR. That 3rd running back or that 3rd wide receiver, in my opinion, is more important than the defense, even though a quality defense can definitely propel you into the playoffs. As we can see, as you look at the landscape at defenses that are on the waiver wire, as long as you are looking at the matchups, you can kind of float a little bit. That part is more interchangeable than it is finding a quality running back or a quality receiver at that position.
I'm going to stop you right there. Quality running back and quality receiver, I mean, that's just the top tier, right? Once you're getting into the deeper rounds, you're not going to find one of those. You're going to ideally, like, look at our waiver wire right now. Anyone that you can pick off the waiver wire or free agency is going to score you at most 10, 11 points a game.
Okay.
And that's if you're lucky, right? If I get a top tier defense, I'm talking, I mean, you benefit from this. You're talking about 30 something points a game for if you're top 3, top 5. I mean, I would much rather have that in my roster versus someone who's going to score me 10 points a game. You got to look at the opportunity cost. If your player gets injured, then you have that backup. But right now, I can find someone to give me 10 points per game. Right now, on a defense, you're right. You can stream the defense. You can stream a defense if you're lucky that's going to get you over 20 points. But if I have a surefire 25, 22 point per game defense, that is a key component to my roster. That's the third best player. Now, you're talking about, like on my team, right? Like, my quarterback is Jackson Dart right now. And my number 1 is Bo Nix, but I have Jackson Dart. Jackson Dart, since he started, is averaging over 25 points per game, right? My wide receiver 1 is technically A.J. Brown. That guy is averaging, maybe 14, 13 points per game? Now, I have Bijan Robinson, and I have boy out of Carolina, the former backup. What's his name?
Rico Dowdle.
Rico Dowdle, and he's doing really well. But doing really well means what? He's averaging about 21, 22. Bijan Robinson is averaging about 24, 25. If you get a defense that averages 25, you're talking about the second best player on your fucking team. So I should forego that to pick up someone who's going to average 10 points per game, who I can pick up from the waiver wire right now anyway.
What I'm saying is that I picked up the Broncos defense in the 10th or 11th round.
And how much are they averaging? Let's take a look. How much is the Broncos defense averaging right now?
They're either number 1 or number 2 in the league. Now,
Okay, to your point, they're number 1.
all right.
And they're averaging 23.7 points.
And I didn't pick them in the 7th round. Now let's talk about the players who did go in the
But that's
7th
because
round.
everybody else, because I actually auto draft this year. If I didn't auto draft, I would have reached for the Broncos and I would have picked them this year. And
All
that would have
right.
gone to me.
But then you wouldn't have had an Emeka and Jigba. You wouldn't have had a Cam Scattergood. Because they also go in that.
But we didn't know that Cam Scattergood was going to be who he was. We can't predict that.
But you also can't predict how well the defense is going
You
to do
can
either.
based off of their previous year experience.
No, that is probably the worst thing that you can do.
How is the worst thing I can do to predict how a defense is going to go based off of how they performed last year, unless they had some major changes in personnel?
There we go.
But then I would
Personnel
know that.
changes, head coach changes,
But I would know that going into the
possible
draft.
injuries that are going to occur. And that's why, in my opinion, the best strategy is if you're going to reach, the last pick is generally the kicker, correct?
That's right.
The pick right before that is generally the defense.
Generally speaking.
All right, so I would reach maybe 1 to 2 more rounds above that point in order to draft my defense because it is a hell of a lot more difficult to find that running back if yours goes down or that wide receiver if yours goes down.
Let me pause you. I've already done that though. By the time I'm drafting my defense, I'm not saying they go in the 3rd round. I've already filled out my starting lineup, which means I have an RB1 and an RB2.
Well, let me remind you that you said that you would pick a defense in the 7th round, so there's no way you could have completely solidified your lineup at that point.
That's a good point. Maybe not the 7th round. I'm filling out my roster first. I'm filling out my wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, running back 1, running back 2. I'm even getting before my kicker, I'm getting my defense. So, depending on how many roster slots we have, how many do we have? 10 this year? Let me take a look at this real quick. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, I'm taking them 7th. I'm taking them before my kicker. That's number 7. We only have 8 spots.
Well, I would love you to continue to do that because I am going to take the backup running back because one of my 2 running backs is going to
No, you mean you're going to take your tertiary running back.
I'm going to take my 3rd running back.
I'm going to take the defense because I'm going to take a surefire. Because if I'm getting the number 1 defense with that 7th round pick, they're going to score 20 plus points. That tertiary running back is never going to score 20 plus points.
I'll just put it this way.
Unless you get like a Rico Dowdle whose circumstances lend themselves to it.
All right. Well, in my opinion, I'll put it this way. To have that 3rd running back to interject to that starting lineup is more beneficial to me than to have a defense that I am not quite certain, because they're only 2 injuries away from not being a top tier defense, to have in my lineup. The defense, in my opinion, is more easily replaceable than the running back will ever be. Because what's going to happen as soon as the starting running back goes down, the wolves will come out. And it's going to depend on where you are in that waiver wire to determine whether or not you are going to have the ability to pick up that next guy to fill that position.
Let us know who you agree with in the comments. We'll be interested to hear this, and we'll talk about it next week. But for now, we're going to wrap this up. The Salty Sacks beat the champs, New York We Know Nothing, which brings you up to 5-5. You're at 500, and it pulls the champs back to 4th place overall, 2nd in their division. Next up, we're going to talk about the San Antonio Clown Babies in segment number 2. Now for our second segment, we're going to be discussing the San Antonio Clown Babies. That's you, Preston Krzyzanowski. The headline is that the Preston has suffered 2 close losses, unfortunately, keeping him at the bottom of the power rankings, even though he's been trying his hardest. This guy has been plagued with injuries and bad luck. And he's a smart football mind, but unfortunately, football gods have been playing against him. In week 9, Preston lost against Empire Strikes Mac, that's Kevin Mack. He lost 95.99 and 99.17. In week 10, he lost versus myself, the Chicago Bootleggers, 121.77 to 122.98. Now let's talk about how Preston's roster performed in week 10. Now, for the good, quarterback Jacoby Brissett was a great pickup by Preston Krzyzanowski. He picked him up after Arizona quarterback Kyle Murray went down. Jacoby Brissett scored 23.42 points this week, and that's off of 258 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 fumbles. Ahead of him even was tight end Trey McBride, who paced the field for Preston this week. He got 29.7 points off of 127 receiving yards and 1 touchdown. Now let's take a break for a second. Just cut to talk about Trey McBride. Heading into week 10, McBride has been averaging about 59.5 receiving yards per game with 5 touchdowns through 8 games. McBride's target share is actually very, very strong. He's had roughly 27.5% of the team's pass targets prior to that week, and his long-term value still depends on touchdown, however. He's very touchdown dependent. His red zone usage and his consistency really makes or breaks him. Have you been paying attention to Trey McBride? Or what do you think about this tight end over in Arizona?
Trey McBride is one of those players who was a little bit touchdown proof last year just based on the volume that he received. This year, not as much because the offense hasn't been as productive as it was last season. Now, there's a big argument in Arizona as to whether or not Jacoby Brissett should be the quarterback going forward, and they should move on from Kyler Murray.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yes.
Kyler Murray's been playing too much Call of Duty.
Yeah, he's been inconsistent. If you watch any ESPN, they say that he has outside interests that may take a little bit too much of his time.
Distracted.
Exactly, especially when you're getting a paycheck like the one he is receiving from the Cardinals. But I think that Trey McBride in our league is a player that you can slot into that flex position and not have to be too nervous about it. However, he does lack that upside that he had last year. So we'll see how the San Antonio Clown Babies decide to slot him going forward. Now, Jacoby Brissett is a different entity on his own because you have to take the good with the bad. And yes, he had 258 yards passing and he had 2 touchdowns, but he also fumbled the ball twice.
That's true.
Which is something you can almost depend on as much as the touchdowns. By that, I mean the turnovers.
Now, you talk about Trey McBride being a good slot in for the flex position. Let's take a look at who Preston Krzyzanowski has on the bench. He has the tight end Juwan Johnson, who is averaging about 11 points per game. He has a wide receiver Rashid Shaheed, who I had at one point, 11.5 points per game. And he has wide receiver Calvin Austin III, who's over in Indiana, who's averaging 8.1 points per game, which means that, Trey McBride is just a fucking shoo-in.
You know what I'm saying? He's the guy to get things done. So even though he's a bit of a boomer bust, I would put him in there counting on the boom and not worrying too much about the bust based on who I have on the bench.
Yes, and let's just keep it real. The Clown Babies have some issues with the bench.
Yeah,
So
they do.
that pretty much slots Trey McBride into his flex position. Going forward, I think that it's going to be a situation as to where he's almost going to be a sit it and forget it based on what he has on the bench, depending on the matchup.
Next up, we're going to talk about King Barbecue, who managed to win narrowly Week 10 despite his team underperforming. He actually won Week 9 as well versus New York We Know Nothing, 138.81 to 112.81. And Week 10 versus Chicago Shits and Giggles, Robert's wife, Michelle Thurman, 109.04 to 103.42. And let's talk about the standout performance for King Barbecue. Worth noting is Lamar Jackson, who in Week 10 scored 17.64 points off of 176 passing yards, 58.6% completion rating, 9 carries and 1 touchdown. If you want to hear a narrative of this game, it is as follows. King Barbecue ripped off 3 straight to emerge as the #1 team in our league. King Barbecue has also benefited from the return of Lamar Jackson, though Lamar played better in Week 9 than he did in Week 10. And King Barbecue's running backs and wide receivers did not live up to their potential in Week 10, nearly costing him the game. So let's take a step back and talk about Lamar Jackson's return. A little bit better in Week 9 than he was in Week 10. What does Lamar Jackson mean to King Barbecue and the Baltimore Ravens, Robert?
Lamar Jackson means consistency. He means upside. He means a strong playoff run. The team is night and day when he's in the lineup and when he is not. The defense is starting to show that they can be a little bit more towards what we expected them to be prior to the season to what the reality has been up until this point into the season. So I think that he can pretty much sit it and forget it with Lamar as long as he's healthy. Now, if you look at it, 17.64 points doesn't necessarily reflect that. But going forward, I don't think that there's very few people in this league that would actually sit Lamar in place of anyone else.
Next up in Week 10, Travis Etienne Jr. for King Barbecue had 16 carries for 56 rushing yards and 1 touchdown, totaling 18.7 points. Travis Etienne Jr. has been an integral part of the King Barbecue offense and came through in Week 10. What are your thoughts on Travis Etienne Jr., Robert?
Oh my goodness. ATN Jr. I think that he is playing for a contract at this point.
Really?
And you're going to get the best out of him. You got the best out of him during his rookie year and the following season. And now he kind of sees the writing on the wall because he's not necessarily that RB1 that a team would want to invest in, especially the Jaguars, because they came into the season with so much promise and they just have failed to live up to expectations. So, if I'm his agent, I am looking at ATN and say, you know what, you better run your ass off. Because you may not be a Jaguar next year, but you want to be a starting running back somewhere. And I think that King Barbecue will reap the benefits of that.
Now moving on to the bad side of King Barbecue, wide receiver Justin Jefferson scored only 7.7 points. That's off of 4 receptions and 37 yards. Justin Jefferson has been a disappointment over this past weekend. Maybe you can argue over the past season. Where do you see Justin Jefferson for where he's at now and where he's going to go for the rest of the year?
I can see why Mitch picked up Justin Jefferson in the first round because he's pretty much been quarterback proof up until this point. Until he met J.J. McCarthy.
Oh, right.
And all of a sudden, we realized why there was a little bit of hesitation about him in the draft. J.J. McCarthy, that is. It's because while he was in Michigan, he rarely was in a position to where he had to throw them into a win. You didn't see tape of that. And for college football fans, you didn't see that in those games. Their offense was predicated on the run game. And now you can see that just matriculating its way into the NFL. You cannot necessarily count on him to throw you into a win. And Jefferson's lack of production is a byproduct of that. So King Barbecue is kind of stuck in a conundrum because you don't want to sit him because of his talent, but you don't necessarily want to start him because he doesn't have a quarterback that can get him the ball down the field. However, from my own personal research, I don't necessarily think that he has an option to sit Jefferson, nor would one of us actually want to sit him if we had the opportunity to do so. So I think that he's going to find himself in a position to where he has to start Jefferson for the remainder of the season and just hope that the offense becomes a little bit more productive.
Despite that, King Barbecue manages to pull the W. Now let's take a look at some of the best plays from his QB1, Lamar Jackson.
What you see in this video is the difficulty in defending the offense of the Baltimore Ravens because their RPO, their run pass option, is one of the best that you will see in the NFL because you have to account for Lamar Jackson, you have to account for Derrick Henry, and you have to account for the ability for that offensive line to hold their blocks for over 2.5 seconds. Also, you have seen the evolution of Lamar Jackson over the course of the last 4 to 5 years because he takes what the defense is giving him versus trying to make a play happen that isn't necessarily there, which essentially makes him unstoppable when he and his offensive weapons are healthy.
Chicago Shits and Giggles was the loser this week, week 10, against King Barbecue. However, it wasn't all bad. Running back Jameson Williams scored 25.9 points with 119 rushing yards and 1 touchdown. Also, the Seahawks defense and special teams notched a team high 32 points. That's off of 2 touchdowns, 2 fumble recoveries, 5 sacks, albeit 22 points allowed. So what are you thinking about the Seahawks defense this year, Robert?
I've got to be honest with you. When I saw him on the waiver wire, I was on the trigger. I almost picked him up myself. But because I have the Broncos defense, I hesitated for a moment because I would have had to actually put in a waiver request for them. And it was basically 1A versus 1B. So I elected not to do so, and you know what? Chicago Shits and Giggles is the benefactor. And boy, did they pay off. That team has been absolutely outstanding so far this year. I mean, you really can't say enough about the production of Njigba, the production of Darnold, who has absolutely been killing it. And when the defense does not have to be on the field for the entire game, it ramps up their production even more. And I really project them being a top 2 defense for the remainder of the season.
All right, that was a good pickup, but let's talk about the bad on Chicago Shits and Giggles. DJ Moore. 0 points in week 10. I mean, what happened? He's had 4 targets, caught nothing, and a new Bears offense under head coach Ben Johnson coming over from the Detroit Lions. I mean, the heir apparent, right? I mean, he was the most sought after head coach in the offseason. And I say we because we're both Bears fans, we got him. But that was to DJ Moore's detriment. So what's happening over in Chicago? He was the wide receiver 1 last year. Why is he getting nothing this year?
He didn't become a bad football player. I think that sometimes when we're playing fantasy football, you have to look another layer deep. And it's his age and contract number. Odunze costs nothing.
Because he's just drafted.
Because he's on a rookie contract.
Exactly, yeah. Last year.
DJ Moore is nearing the end of his contract to where he's going to ask for an extension and a new contract.
We acquired him from Carolina.
Absolutely. So, as an organization, if you can phase out the high-paid veteran receiver and get the young rookie receiver, as your number one, well, guess what? That frees up a lot of your salary cap.
And that seems to be working for Chicago.
And it seems to be working so far so good because Odunze is a talent. Chicago also has younger talent surrounding him in that wide receiver core outside of DJ Moore. So the writing was somewhat on the wall if you were paying attention to Bears politics. And that's kind of what we've seen occur. So the next team that gets DJ Moore will get the DJ Moore that we saw in Carolina and that we saw for the first year or two with the Chicago Bears.
Because you expect them to feature him as a number one option.
Absolutely. And I still think that he's talented enough to be a number one, but not with a team that is trying to rebuild to compete for a championship. Yes, sometimes the politics and the money get in the way. It's not a lack of talent. It's just really how much money do we have to get in your pocket in order for you to be productive.
That's a lump of coal for Chicago Shits and Giggles, who's sitting at 5-5 on the season, and I believe she is third in the Central Division. I have to double check that. Correct me if I'm wrong. To add insult to injury, Chicago suffered a regression from Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley, who scored about 17 and 15 points respectively in Week 10. Also, unfortunately, running back David Montgomery is losing touches to Jahmyr Gibbs, who appears to be emerging in Detroit, and that's lowering his value for Michelle Thurman. And of course, as we mentioned, DJ Moore continues to be a problem for Michelle. So, as expected, King Barbecue rolls in Week 10. He's number one of the league at 8-2, I believe. That is correct. And Michelle, she falls to 5-5, middle of the pack. She's going to have to put in a little bit more effort going into Week 11. But that's all we have for this matchup. Next, we roll into our segment 4, which is Ben Incognito Ben. Next up is our fourth segment of this week's Weekly Yard. We're going to talk about Ben Incognito Ben. After an incredible start to the season, he's been slowing down quite a bit. The last 2 weeks, he suffered some L's. Week 9, he lost against Chicago Shits and Giggles, 138.35 to 149.83. And in Week 10, he lost to Bama Cupcakes, 91.42 to 124.47. Now, what happened with Ben? Ben decided to bench QB1 Caleb Williams, and it would have made sense because in the previous couple of weeks, he wasn't performing so well. However, in the last couple of weeks, Caleb has scored 42.7 points in Week 9 and 26.1 points in Week 10, outperforming starter Sam Darnold in both weeks. Had he have started Caleb in Week 9, he would have won that contest. Ben also got nearly 0 points from his starting running backs in Week 10, somehow missing the fact that Ramondre Stevenson was actually out in Week 9 due to a toe injury. Not quite sure what Ben was thinking there because he was out in Week 9 and Ben benched him, but put him in Week 10 and he was still out. I assume that Ben thought that he was okay for Week 10 and maybe there were some questions there and he just didn't check right before the game. All 3 of Ben's starting receivers in Week 10 performed below their averages this week. So let's take it a step back, Robert. Let's talk about what Ben did well in Week 10. He started wide receiver Jackson Smith-Njigba, who scored 21.3 points. He had 5 receptions for 93 receiving yards, 18.6 point average yards per reception, and 1 touchdown. How are you feeling about Jackson Smith-Njigba in Week 10 and in the season overall?
I think that Smith-Njigba.
Hard to say his name.
Yes. It's either, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, number 1 or number 2 wide receiver up until this point in the season. Mm-hmm. He's basically a sit it and forget it. Mm-hmm. Now, did Sam Darnold do his part? Absolutely not. But at the same time, you can say that Jackson Smith-Njigba is a player that you will just put in your lineup regardless of the matchup. So there's really nothing negative to say about that decision or his production. Now let's go to Ramondre.
Oh, I know you have strong feelings about Ramondre.
Oh,
Stevenson.
Lord,
Go ahead and tell us about it.
Lord.
0 points the last couple of weeks. Let's go.
He has. But you know what? I'm not going to talk about my own concerns with him leading up into this season. His production up until the injury has been relatively good. However, if you are paying attention to what's going on in the league and what's going on with his injury, there's absolutely no way that you can start him. So for me, that just means that you weren't paying attention this particular week. And sometimes we know that life gets in the way.
Sure.
Hey, but you know what? It's to the detriment of your team. Because he should have been a guy who was on the bench. Going forward, it's going to be interesting to see what level of production he has when he is healthy. Because his backup, and I'm not going to say it because I dropped him and he has completely started to blow up, has come into his own. So we'll see what happens as far as that's concerned.
Taking it a step back, Jackson Smith-Njigba is actually number one in our league. Or at least tied for number one. I don't know if there's another receiver.
Right there in number one.
He's right there. You're 100% right with him. Ben also messed up at his RB2, Terrell Jennings, 0.5 points on week 10, 4 carries, 5 rushing yards, averaging 1.3 yards per carry. Do you even know who Terrell Jennings is? I don't know who this guy is.
I believe, and I might be wrong, beat it up in the comments, that he is a backup running back for the Patriots. So I think he kind of doubled down on just making the wrong decisions. So that's something that he paid for.
So do you think Ben made the right decision by handcuffing Terrell Jennings? I mean, in theory, handcuffing Terrell Jennings to Ramondre Stevenson.
No. And the reason why I don't believe that he did is because Ramondre has a foot injury that will recover. And I believe that Ramondre will be back next week, and the Patriots have shown us that regardless of what Ramondre does, he will have a role in this offense.
So would you say that quarterback Sam Darnold, who performed poorly this week, only 9.92 points, 178 passing yards, 83.3 completion percentage, which sounds good, but he also had 1 interception, 2 fumbles to accompany his 1 touchdown. Would you say that that was a... I mean, we have the benefit of hindsight, right? I mean, we're Monday morning quarterbacking. Was he a smart move to put in place of fading Caleb Williams 2 weeks ago, right? Because we know that over the past 2 weeks, Caleb Williams has done well. But coming off of a couple weeks of poor performance, fantasy-wise, would Sam Darnold be the quarterback that you picked to fill in for him?
I would. If you give me the Caleb Williams or Sam Darnold, I would take the Sam Darnold just because I like the team, I like the opportunity, and I like the weapons. And I would have probably gone in that same direction. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. And that happens in fantasy. Sometimes you have options and you weigh them. You weigh the defense that they're playing, and you also are going to weigh the trajectory of that player. How well have they done for you so far? And if I was making that determination, I probably would have leaned in that same direction, but it wouldn't have been an easy decision.
No. So you can't fault Ben for that, but unfortunately, we can't change history, and Ben has dropped 2 games, which has moved him down in the rankings to, I believe, 3rd place overall. Not bad, still in the playoff hunt, but it is what it is. Let's move on to the commissioner's wife. That's Nicole Gales. She won this game in week 10 versus Ben. She benefited from the resurgence of Kieran Williams, who scored exactly 24.4 points in both weeks 9 and 10. Holy shit. And her backup QB, J.J. McCarthy, while he played mediocre in place of starter Patrick Mahomes in week 10, he did enough to get it done. Also, Bama's defense and special teams, Brown had their best game since week 7, filling in for underperformers in Bama's lineup. Now let's talk about Bama's lineup. Kieran Williams, week 10, 24.4 points, 14 carries, 84 total scrimmage yards, and 2 touchdowns. How are you feeling about Kieran Williams this year?
Kyron Williams has been an absolute beast for the last 3 years. As a matter of fact, I picked him up the same year that Puka Nacua blew up.
Really?
Yes, they were on the waiver wire at the same time.
Excellent foresight.
Yes, and don't get me wrong, I wanted Nacua, but I put in a waiver wire pick for both players, and I got Kyron, and I was not disappointed at all. Now, the issue with Kyron
is you could kind of see the writing on the wall after the first couple of years because he was playing 80% of the snaps. And you thought that sooner or later his body is going to break down. For anybody who's a football fan, or even more so who has played football, you understand that there's only so many runs in those legs because you just take so many hits at that position. And you can see with what the Rams are doing right now as they're putting Corum more and more into the mix to where you can see that it's probably more of a 60-40 split or maybe a 70-30 without the numbers right there in front of me. However, if I did draft Kyren Williams and he was in my lineup, he would stay in my lineup because you know that his floor is not that low, even though his ceiling may not be as high.
Let's talk about. And finally, we're going to take an opportunity to acknowledge Tara Mitchner in her victory over Team Gales, 165.49 to 130.25 on the back of Jonathan Taylor. Wow, what a pickup by Tara. And it was a risky one, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because he's been injured, more or less over the last
And Richardson was the starting quarterback coming into the season.
Who would have thought, right? Team Tata's Jonathan Taylor, playing in Berlin no less, goes for 66.6 points in Week 10 versus Team Gales, leading the Tatas to victory, bringing them both to 5-5. So Tara goes up to 5-5, the commish goes down to 5-5. And let's talk about Jonathan Taylor's stats. 32 carries, 244 rushing yards, 42 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns, including a career-long 83-yard touchdown run. I mean, what is there to say about Jonathan Taylor this season?
Let's think about Jonathan Taylor coming out of the University of Wisconsin. He hit the ground running. He was an absolute terror coming into the league. And then what happened? Injuries. And you know what? At that position, it's almost an expectation. But there was always light at the end of the tunnel until they decided to draft Richardson. And again, we're all football fans. And he was the type of kid that came in with a lot of promise, but not a lot of experience.
Now you talked to me about Richardson's time in college, that he didn't have a lot of time under center. Talk to me a little bit about that.
I believe, without actually pulling up the information in front of me, that he had less than 12 starts as a starting quarterback in college. For those who are unaware, he did go, I believe, to the University of Florida. Correct me if I'm wrong. Beat me up in the comments. However, coming into the combine, his measurables were off the charts. He was projected to be a mix between a Cam Newton and a Lamar Jackson.
Far away from that.
Now, who knows whether or not that's what he will end up being, but at this point, he seems like he is going to be more of a Jamarcus Russell. And that's just because now in the league, you almost have to be ready to be a starter no later than year 2. And he also has the injury bug, which is something that plagued him while he was in college. So, coming into this season, David is absolutely right. By drafting him so early, you are really taking a chance. Not only because he had poor quarterback play, but because he also had a risk of injury. However, Tara put both of those aside, obviously, and she drafted him. And look, the proof is in the pudding. She's got an RB1 who you sit and you forget and could possibly pull you into the playoffs.
Clearly, Tara made the right decision. I mean, Jonathan Taylor's been a beast, #1 running back in our league. Let's take a look at some of his highlights from Week 10, including his season-high run.
All right, I want you to take a look at the offensive line. Watch the white hats. Watch how far upfield they get. If you watch that offensive line, they're between 3 to 5 yards off the ball once it's snapped. That is how you know that you have a solid running game, because it's all predicated on the offensive line. And as we watch these clips, you will see that they are gaining ground on the defense, who is in a hybrid 3-4. And in my opinion, it is the defense that you don't want to play if you are attempting to stop the run because you simply don't have enough hats to match the hats on offense, especially when they're that talented, to spring a running back like Jonathan Taylor.
Well, that's all we have for this week's edition of the Weekly Yard, the first video podcast of the newsletter. Let us know how you feel about this format. We don't have many weeks left. What, about 4 weeks left in the season? But this is something we're interested in doing in the future. We'll carry it into the playoffs, maybe even next year, depending on your thoughts. Make sure to leave a comment. Maybe this can become a regular thing. Or if you want us to go back to the written newsletter, we'll continue to do that too. I want to wish you the best of luck going into week 11. I'm David Thurman. This is Robert Thurman.
Robert Thurman speaking. Robert Thurman out. Till next time.
Deputy Commissioner signing out. Good luck in week 11, everybody.
Thank you.